Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Farina Struzy. I'll be your MC today. I see a lot of people have joined. This morning, we're having the series on justice as part of the Northern Virginia Baha'i Center morning program. Please note that this program is being recorded and being made available on the Northern Virginia or NOVA Baha'i Center website. At this time, we'd like to remind everyone that you've been muted to reduce the audio feedback. However, we invite you to enable your camera so that the speaker can see you. You can enable your camera by moving your mouse to the lower part of your screen and clicking on the video camera icon. We'll begin the program with prayers and devotion.
Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. the soul, and those souls whose inner being is lit by the love of God, by the love of God, are even as spreading rays of light by the love of God, by the love of God. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul. Love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul, for true love, real love, is the love for God. For true love, real love, is the love for God. For true love, love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul, love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul, love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul, love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul, love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul, love is not of the body, but completely of the soul. The soul.
Friends, our speaker today is Russell Ballew. He lives in California's Central Valley, to which he refers as the Dust Bowl. He's devoted his life to systematically building capacity and capital in the African American community, and his greatest pleasure is accompanying his 3 children, Yasmin, Erfan, and Bayan, as they discover their capacities as brilliant stars in service to humanity. Friends, it is my pleasure and honor to invite Mr. Ballew to address you today. If you have any questions during his presentation, which I'm sure you will have, he will open the opportunity to you. And please, if you want to raise your hand, it will be helpful if you do so by going to the participants section and clicking raise hand. Or if you raise your hand visually, it might be difficult for me to catch you on the screen, but I will try to. Or in which case, I will let you know the order in which you can ask your question. Also, Mr. Ballew will also ask you for volunteers to read passages. At that time, you can also do the same to volunteer. And I'll call your name and you can just go right ahead, or I'll give an order of names and you can just go right ahead after the person who's before you. I hope, please again remember that this program is being recorded. It will be posted on YouTube. So if you wish to keep yourselves muted, that will be helpful so that everyone can be heard. Thank you.
Aloha. So nice to see all of your beautiful faces. Good morning. Warm greetings to all of you. Thank you, Farinas. And thank you to all the members of the committee for inviting me to join you today. The prayer is that we'll share some things together that will help all of us discover our capacity to be heroes in helping to bring into this world, in Baha'u'llah's worlds, striving to translate that which hath been written into reality and action. This is the whole purpose of our conversation today. Again, in the words of Baha'u'llah, to strive to translate that which hath been written into reality and action, using the wonderful framework that the House of Justice has given to all of us to become the heroes. In its words, the protagonists of unfolding Baha'u'llah's New World Order. Okay? So, you're going to see my head pivot because I'm on a couple of screens. This is Zoom. This is live. Please bear with me. I'm going to turn, and what we're going to do is we're going to share the set of slides for today. Yay. And hopefully, they are coming across nice and big. Today, we're going to talk about fostering capacity and capital in the African American community. And what we're trying to do is to get to Baha'u'llah's prescription for universal prosperity. We know all very well, Baha'u'llah's quote, he says, the well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. And so we come at this process from a different perspective than what we've seen historically in the world. And before I take you into what Baha'u'llah said and how he's guided us, I thought we'd take a moment to just kind of look back at the past, okay? And what we're looking back at the past is how historically this has happened. And if I could get someone from the audience to read our agenda today, that would be great.
How have human historically fostered capacity and capital in America? What is the prevailing approach to capacity building and capital formation in America? What are the limits and consequences of the prevailing approach? What does the Baha'i faith teach as the secret of universal prosperity? What does the Baha'i faith do to build capacity and capital today? That is, examples of conscientious community and capital building at the grassroots. Explore practical steps you can take. That is, considering what we're being called to do as protagonists striving to.
Striving to remake the world in the image of God, okay? And as we go through this, what you're going to find is that Russell makes all kinds of wonderful mistakes. And this is consistent with the wonderful, humble environment of learning that we're all called to participate in. You don't have to be a pro, you just have to try. And that's what we're going to do today. All right, so how are capacity fostered and capital and capacity fostered historically in America? This is a picture. And this is a picture that tells a narrative about how Europeans came to America. And it was great. They came and the Indians welcomed them and life was wonderful. In fact, one of the big stories that kind of promotes this narrative is the story of Pocahontas. Now I'm 51 years old. So when I was little, I got the idealized version, and that is John Smith, right, came here. And he fell in love. And Pocahontas loved him and wanted to do everything she could to be more like John Smith and the Europeans that came to uplift the natives. I think today people are given a more robust sense of what actually has happened. The simple truth of the matter is, though, there are elements of truth in all myths and in all narratives. The problem with this narrative is that it misses the violence and the cruelty that was a part of the process of the establishment of America. Let's look at that in a little more detail. From the very beginning of the forming of this country, in fact, before the country, the United States was formed in 1776, people were coming to the shores of America to exploit its bounty. And the process of doing this was so sophisticated. They even had institutions and formal systems, institutions and systems to exploit, to hurt, and to plunder. We'd call it robbing, roguery, and theft. They call it privateering. Okay, and what do you mean by privateering, Russell? Well, basically, the idea is this. You had several contending countries. We'll pick Portugal, Spain, and England. Just three of many, right? And they would send their people out to attack the ships of other countries and take whatever you could from that ship, okay? And if you did that, you were called a privateer. You had a letter of marque, and it made you legitimate in the pursuit of all kinds of heinous and abominable actions. And to really illustrate this, I'm going to show you, because this tendency to do whatever is required to make a buck continues to be an integral part of our culture in the United States. And to really illustrate that, I want to show you a clip from a movie that I think really shows us something of this unfortunate historical tendency, again, to do anything to make a buck. Before I show you this clip, I have a question. And the question is for the audience, and it's simply this. What is the name of the first movie to make $2 billion with a B, $2 billion at the box office? Well, there's got to be someone that knows the answer to this.
I'm scanning the participants.
No one knows?
There are no chats.
Are we hearing crickets? Am I boring you already? I'll tell you the answer. The first movie to make $2 billion at the box office was
Avatar.
That's right. Who said it?
Me.
Okay, I don't know who he is.
Power, yeah.
Well, you're right. Okay, and I want to contend.
got-
In fact, I will wave my hands and I'll yell and I'll shout and say, there's a lot to this movie. Well, let me ask this of the audience. We all know the movie. If it made $2 billion, there's got to be more than 2 people in the room out of 30 that have seen it. Why do you think it made so much money?
Good marketing.
Paymon says because the marketing was really good. Other answers?
It was something new, something that we had never seen before. in that time.
Absolutely. It was, the marketing was fantastic. It was something that kind of like Star Wars. Wow, it's a whole nother world. I mean, they had mountains that were floating, you know, it was amazing. But I would contend that no, that's not the reason. The movie, and we'll go into this in more detail as we go through the talk, is a fresh take on a concept that's thousands of years old. And I'll come back to that concept. One of the things, I'll introduce it to you over time and as we go through this talk, but one of the really cool things in the movie is it shows us the limits, right, of doing any and everything for money. So let's look at the clip. This is from the movie Avatar. Hopefully you can see and hear it. We're going to share the computer sound, and we're going to cross our fingers, say our prayers, make it big, and hopefully you can all see this. Sorry, friends, but this is just technology. We have to wait for it to buffer through. Okay. Now, friends, let's think about what we just saw. What's happening in the here? Let's take some answers from the audience.
Well, I see exploitation.
Sure.
Justifying.
Okay. So there's exploitation, absolutely. Working from the slide here, and hopefully you can see it, what's being exalted? What's the most important thing here?
Money.
Specifically getting unobtainium, right, which is being used as a fuel source back on Earth. So they're on this moon called Pandora, and they need the unobtainium and take it back to the world, the Earth, so that it can power everything. Okay, so that is what is exalted. Everything's exploited to get the unobtainium. What is being diminished?
The lives of the people there, or the inhabitants.
Absolutely, Paimon. I think he refers to them as blue monkeys. Now, friends, so when we talk about racism, because part of what we're attempting to do through this process is to get some insights that we can apply to the history of racism in the United States, we have to remember that when money is what we're talking about, it's a conduit to power, right? And people will do anything to obtain that money and that power. And one of the things that historically has happened, one race to another, one group of people to another, is that you diminish them. You make them less than human. We could talk a lot about that. That's not why we're here. I'll only add this point. This is a very important thing that is done when one race attempts to exploit another, because we are one. And it hurts hurting people. It hurts hurting people. And so you have to come up with a very elaborate rationalization to make the pill of exploiting others go down. All right, let's keep going because we got a lot of ground to cover. Can you see the slide deck?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So we can keep moving here. Okay, so cruelty is intertwined in the history of America, okay? And cruelty is what helped to bring the first set of Africans to this country in 1619, in August of 1619. And the specifics are, there was a place, Luanda, in Angola, where slaves were taken by the Portuguese on a ship. And the Portuguese are taking their bounty, this human cargo, and as they're on the road, they are attacked by another ship from England called the White Lion, a group of privateers. And those privateers they attack the Portuguese ship, they kill all of the Portuguese, and they take whatever they could from that ship. And that is how the very first set of people came from Africa to the United States of America. And in this picture, what you see is the captain of the White Lion offering to the people at that time, the Virginia Company, for sale, these Africans. Question of the group: what did he sell them for? Lives of human beings. What do you think he took in exchange for the lives of human beings? Food. Food. Okay, let's keep going. Now, America's interesting because we have two irreconcilable narratives, two irreconcilable truths occurring. One of them is a reality of doing whatever is required to make a buck. The other is that we had a group of people coming here saying we wanted America to be different. So you have these two cross currents, right? And the group of people that wanted to come here and make America different were tired of the tyranny associated with Europe. The idea that under autocratic rule, and that's how England was run, there were a group of people that were privileged above all others. That group of people were the aristocrats. And let's be real clear about reality, right? You have levels at that time, and the levels were kings, queens, aristocrats, and then everyone below them. And so the people coming over to America want to set up a place where the common human being could thrive, where they would have a shot to themselves be property owners. Because you see, in Europe, all the good property was taken by the kings and aristocrats. So they came to America thinking, oh my goodness, we can have land. In fact, there was a gentleman, a philosopher named Voltaire, who talked about this in a very popular book. It's called Candide. Won't go into that in a lot of detail, other than that the upshot of the entire book is that you need to go out into the world and get your own. And this is what people came to America trying to do. So you had these high ideas, and you had this capitalism, unbridled capitalism. And the unbridled capitalism played into how the high ideals were actually implemented, executed. So we said, okay, we're going to have government buying for the people, but it was only going to be for white men. And we would keep slavery because that would be something that would help us. And so that greed contorted, and that's the best word really, the high ideals into a system really that allowed some people to experience new freedoms, new opportunities, but broad swaths of humanity to remain subjected. Okay. Specifically, the delegates, when forming the country, agreed that each slave would only count as a fraction of a human being. This is codifying the pursuit of capitalism in the country's laws in the very beginning. Now, this is a picture of something that I think captures a lot of what I've been arguing. Is there anyone in the audience that can tell me what this is? A picture of, in fact, you guys all know because it's in your backyard. If you can't answer this, we have a problem.
Monticello.
It is Monticello, exactly. How was Monticello built? Well, okay, so who owned Monticello?
George Washington?
No.
Thomas Jefferson.
Absolutely. Okay, absolutely. He's one of the presidents of the United States. Moreover, he was one of he wrote the document that helped make this country what it is, right? How interesting, right? How was his estate, his plantation, if we're being specific about it, how was it built? Come on, friends. We know the answer to the. I'm sorry?
Slaves.
Absolutely, right? Slaves built it. Now, we all know that. You know, slavery existed at that time. And although Thomas Jefferson was brilliant, and he helped to write the document that enshrined many of the freedoms that to this day make America a shining light. Let's be clear about that. He was personally conflicted, personally compromised by his own desires for power. And I think the best way to really show how insidious this was to illustrate another important point. You see, Thomas Jefferson did not have millions of dollars laying around to actually afford the building of his mansion, Monticello. So what he had to do is he had to actually take his slaves and get a mortgage against their person to afford the capital to pay for that building. Friends, okay, so I'll repeat what I just said because it's profoundly important. Slaves were so valuable that their owners used them as collateral to obtain sums of money. The funny thing about it is that at the same time that these slaves were not only through their labor providing the means of survival and in their persons providing the capital to afford lifestyles that were unprecedented, they were diminished by all of the institutions that prevailed at that time through a philosophy, an ideology, that's the best word for it, white supremacy. The ideology is very simple. It says, hey, whites, you're here and you're great. Blacks, you're an inferior set of beings. Friends, how interesting, how ironic, how insane to say this group of people that we depend upon for their labor to create for us the means of livelihood, and in their persons we depend upon to give us capital, they are inferior. They are garbage. They're animals. That's insane. It's a certain form of insanity, right? To hold that notion. And Thomas Jefferson, if you look at his writings, he said, you know, slavery, he called it the peculiar institution, is actually horrible for the Black people, but infinitely worse for the whites. Infinitely worse for the whites. Why? You see, to do slavery, and again, I meant what I said, when Baha'u'llah tells us we're one, he's describing reality as it actually is. And to hurt another human being is hard to do. It's horrifying, both on you and on the other person, but the person that perpetrates it, it sticks with you. It's an ugliness that endures. And Jefferson understood this. And he speaks of it eloquently. Okay, friends, continuing. But this is how it was. And it was quite pervasive. The point I want to make in this slide, though, is that it only helped a small fraction of those that actually had slaves. Very small minority. And so if you have a system that is abominable, reprehensible, not good for anybody, right? Other than that, it creates monumental wealth. You have to expend a tremendous amount of time and money and effort to keep it going. And so this is what whites did. And Lincoln saw this, rose up against it at precisely the same time as the founder of the Baha'i faith declared himself. 1863, he declared himself. Lincoln takes center stage in America as a voice counter to the prevailing notions about slavery and its necessity. I want to read this because it's really telling. To Lincoln, the promise of upward mobility was key, both to the nation's economic growth and to its social stability. It was the churning energy and desire of Americans, their quest to improve their lives, that Lincoln saw the great promise for the country. Government's role was to ensure that they had the opportunity to succeed in this quest. He flatly rejected the popular notion that society needed a permanent class of low-wage workers, slaves, to provide the foundation for economic progress. Okay, so this was what people believed. Lincoln rejected it. And this is the simplicity of his rejection of the notion. He says, the prudent, if someone could read this, because I'm over talking my welcome.
The prudent penniless beginner in the world labors for wages a while, saves a surplus with which to buy tools or land for himself, then labors on his own account another while, and at length hires another new beginner to help him.
So think about this. If it's the case, right, that you are a maker of a good or a service, and this is one of the things that in the second to the last hidden word, it tells us that we should all be like fruitful trees, that we have to engage in crafts and professions. So let's say that you are a maker of custom chairs, excellent chairs, and you have a price that you want to try to offer that at. But if someone else has their slaves making the same chairs, they can always undercut you because that slave's chairs, that slave's labor is free. Lincoln understood this. And he said, at the end of the day, this is actually bad economically for the preponderance of Americans. All right. So far, if I hope I'm coming across clear. I think, and this is probably, I'm probably wrong in saying this, but from Russell's perspective, I think not enough time is spent thinking about the relationship between white supremacy and racism and all of these things and materialism. And if we look very carefully at the Baha'i writings, there is no confusion. Shoghi Effendi makes it very clear that the source problem, the essence of the difficulties around racism is materialism. Okay. And so what we have to do is to say, oh, if that's the source, because, at the end of the day, we are charged. Baha'is are charged with the task. If you look at the letter from the House of Justice on July 22nd of this year, we're given a reminder that our task is to eradicate racism. So the House of Justice says to us, hey, we have to know what we're really dealing with. And in its essence, it's materialism. And we're still grappling with that. And what I want to do is to really address this issue with a remembrance of Baha'u'llah. So I argued, in fact, it's not an argument, it's just a fact, that at the precise moment that this country made a shift, engaged in a turning point in the agency of a man named Abraham Lincoln, who took the center stage and rose up to represent the preponderance of people in this country who said that the institution of slavery had to end. At precisely that time, we see Baha'u'llah take center stage. And for the first time, this bears repeating, for the very, very first time in all of human history, a manifestation of God unequivocally ends slavery. In the Bible, slaves are told to obey and actually be grateful to their masters. In the Quran, slavery is allowed. Baha'u'llah says, hey, slavery is abolished. And it is important to understand that he wasn't a carpenter or didn't come from, in the case of Muhammad, as exalted and glorious as he was, it wasn't until he actually married a woman of means that he had means. Baha'u'llah was born an aristocrat. Bears repeating. He was in the class of human beings that owned multiple things, and God knows he did. In fact, one of his possessions, many of his possessions are in this day priceless. But to give you some sense of it, imagine if you had in your family a sheepskin on which His Holiness, the Imam Ali, had written. This is one of the things that Baha'u'llah's family owned. They owned that, right? And so he, as a token of his love for humanity, forsook his status, gave up his palace and properties to pursue a process to launch for all of humanity an awakening to a radical reconceptualization of worth. And it's simply said in a sentence: the things of the next world are more important than this. And to really convey that, he tells a beautiful, beautiful story. And before we go into the story, I just want to reiterate something. You see, he was actually an aristocrat. And so in that class of people, you get to have weddings for 7 days. And when you have your wedding, princes show up, courtiers show up, and you get to sit in the best positions. Let's remember this as we read through the story together. Let's have some volunteers to read this story.
When I was still a child and had not yet attained the age of maturity, my father made arrangements in Tehran for the marriage of one of my older brothers. And as is customary in that city, the festivities lasted for 7 days and 7 nights. On the last day, it was announced that the play Shah Sultan Salim would be presented. A large number of princesses, dignitaries, and notables of capital gathered for the occasion. I was sitting in one of the upper rooms of the building and observing the scene. Presently, a tent was pitched in the courtyard, and before long, some small human-like figures, each appearing to be no more than about a hand's span in height, were seen to emerge from it and raise the call, "His Majesty is coming. Arrange the seats at once."
Please, another person, let's continue the story.
There appeared arrayed in regal majesty and crowned with the royal diadem, a kingly figure bearing himself with the utmost haughtiness and grandeur, at turns advancing and pausing in his progress, who proceeded with a great solemnity, poise, and dignity to seat himself upon his throne.
At that moment, a volley of shots was fired. A fanfare of trumpets was sounded, and king and tent were enveloped in a pall of smoke. When it had cleared, the king, ensconced upon his throne, was seen surrounded by a suite of ministers, princes, and dignitaries of state, who, having taken their places, were standing at attention in his presence.
After this, king held audience with his court, during which intelligence was received that a rebellion had broken out on a certain frontier. Thereupon the king reviewed his troops and dispatched several regiments, supported by artillery, to quell the uprising. A few moments later, cannons were heard booming from behind the tent, and it was announced that a battle had been engaged.
This youth regarded the scene with great amazement. When the royal audience was ended, the curtain was drawn, and after some 20 minutes, a man emerged from behind the tent, carrying a box under his arm. "What is this box?" I asked him, "and what was the nature of this display?" He replied, "The king, the princes, and the ministers, their pomp and glory, are now contained within this box." Ever since that day, all the trappings of the world have seemed in the eyes of this youth akin to that same spectacle. How greatly I marveled that men should pride themselves upon such vanities. Never have I looked upon anything save that I have seen extinction before it. Such a profound, beautiful, useful, excellent insight. Never have I looked upon anything save that I have seen extinction before it. Ya Baha'u'llah. Friends, the intensity of a materialistic experience, the intensity of it, sometimes clouds the simple fact that this is temporary, right? And at the end of the day, we're on the hook to make of this experience an opportunity to successfully, safely pass to the next world. So one of the things a person might say was, well, Russell, you know, that's nice. We all know that we're going to die one day. But does that mean that, you know, that knowledge will help humanity one day remake the world into a different way of existing? Maybe make the world into a place where there's no such thing as racism. I mean, that's never really happened before. That's not possible. And of course, Abdu'l-Baha's response is a book. That book is called The Secret of Divine Civilization. Long book, but the essence of the answer, the theme in his treatise is that whenever the manifestation of God comes, he unfurls a process by which the world is remade. And it always happens. And if you look into the African American tradition, as we suffered under slavery, we took special note of and derived succor, hope, and inspiration from the story of the coming of Moses to the promised people, right? To his chosen folks. And Moses appeared in Egypt at a time when the Israelites were enslaved and under the greatest of oppressions. Let's read this wonderful passage from The Secret of Divine Civilization. Someone could read that so nice and clear.
He blazed like a lamp of divine guidance, and by the light of salvation, he led that lost people out of the shadows of ignorance into knowledge and perfection. He gathered Israel's scattered tribes into the shelter of the unifying and universal word of God, and over the heights of union, he raised up the banner of harmony, so that within a brief interval, those benighted souls became spiritually educated, and they who had been strangers to the truth rallied to the cause of the oneness of God, and were delivered out of their wretchedness, their indigence, their incomprehension, and captivity, and a extreme degree of happiness and honor.
Thank you so much. Friends, this is a big, 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 big deal. And unfortunately, we have a tendency to make big deals into big and complicated. It's big, but it's not complicated. Whenever the word of God comes, the manifestation of God appears, he remakes the world, endowing all with the capacity to be much better. In this particular story, it was so amazing what Moses was able to do with the Israelites that a young man left Greece, of all places, left Greece to go and study in another nation. And that young man was Socrates. Socrates went and studied under the Israelites. Abdu'l-Baha explains this in the story, and took from them two big ideas. God exists, and there's a next life. He went back from having studied this concept with the Israelites and shared it in unnumbered discourses, which to this day remain I would argue, one of the most compelling ways to talk about the next life. Yeah. In fact, Baha'u'llah talks about Socrates. Abdu'l-Baha talks about Socrates. And he was just one of the fruits of the coming of Moses. And what did Moses give us? Much, but a little bit compared to what Baha'u'llah has provided. There's no comparison. Baha'u'llah says, is not the object of every revelation to effect a transformation in the whole character of mankind, a transformation that shall manifest itself both outwardly and inwardly, that shall affect both its inner life, right? Inner life, and external conditions. For if the character of mankind be not changed, the futility of God's universal manifestation would be apparent. The manifestations of God are not incapable. Oh, quite the contrary. They are quite excellent and able. Excellent and able. So, what can we expect? What does the faith teach us? Well, I want to come here and give you guys an opportunity. Whenever I give a talk, I like to give an opportunity to the audience, yay, to win a token of our conversation. So I have a little coin that I'd like to share if you can answer the question. So before we get to that question, so think of, get your brain caps on and, get into the chat box. I'm going to ask a question in the next slide. And if you get the answer correctly, we'll send you a nice silver coin. Okay. So Baha'u'llah teaches a radical reconception of value. And he says, exaltest thou over the treasures thou dost possess, knowing that they shall perish. Rejoicest thou in that thou rulest a span of earth, when the whole world is, in the estimation of the people of Baha, worth as much as the black in the eye of a dead ant. Whither are gone the proud in their palaces? Gaze thou into their tombs, that thou mayest profit by this example, inasmuch as we have made it a lesson unto every beholder. So here's the question, the coin question, if you will. What is the most valuable thing in the world? We'll take answers in the chat box now. We'll take a minute to hear from you.
Perhaps you want to repeat the question. Okay, we have a response from someone who says love is the most valuable thing in the world.
No.
Living a life that helps others.
No. And we really want to pass this on to the folks up there. So I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but keep trying. In fact, I'll give a hint. If the most valuable thing in the world.
The human soul.
That's closer. And that is the best answer.
Someone said the heart.
Okay, those are both. Okay, so I'm going to show you this, and we'll see if we can't get the exact answer. Right now, the best answer is the human soul, and that will be the winner if we don't get precisely.
Sorry, I think you missed it. Someone said the heart.
Not that.
Okay.
Although the heart is very important. Let's look at this slide, and if I could have someone read both the question, Farnaz, if you could read the question and the quote, please.
What is the most valuable thing in the world? All that is in heaven and earth I have ordained for thee, except the human heart, which I have made the habitation of my beauty and glory. Yet thou didst give my home and dwelling to another than me. Baha'u'llah.
Yay. Okay, so here's the deal. The human heart, one could say that's it, but not really.
There's
Okay.
one more answer if you want to give them a chance.
Yes, of course. I want the answer to pop out.
Someone said the recognition of the manifestation of God and obedience to his command.
Yes, I'll take that. Okay, so here's the deal, friends, okay? The entire purpose for which everything, and I mean everything, from the Holy Tombs in Baha'i, from the Universal House of Justice in Haifa, and every other thing, big or small, they were all created to serve the covenant. And the covenant, what it does is it's all about souls that come into recognizing Baha'u'llah. It's the spirit of faith is the exact, precise answer. The spirit of faith. Yes. You see, Jesus said it beautifully. He says, unless a man be born again, he cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. And the whole purpose of the coming of the manifestations of God is to have us fall in love with them. And through that love, a child is conceived. Mr. Adib Tahir Zadeh speaks of this most eloquently. And that child that is conceived is called the child of faith. And it is through that faith that we recognize the manifestation of God, and each of us are on the hook to do that. My friend, if you don't recognize the manifestation of God, you have a hard time making the passage. And once you've recognized the manifestation of God, you have to obey his teachings. Ismail, whoever the person is that got the correct answer, if you can share their address to me privately, I'll send this off to them. And thank you for participating, everybody.
Wonderful.
Okay. The spirit of faith is the most valuable thing in the world. Friend, these are two brothers. And I want to illustrate something to you that is just beautiful and profound. We are told in the Baha'i faith to achieve a dynamic coherence between the material and the spiritual. We're not just sitting around in rooms praying. That has nothing to do with our revelation. This is a revelation that's hands-on. And to illustrate that for all humanity, for all time, Baha'u'llah bestowed the designations of the king and the beloved of martyrs on two men who were financiers. They were the financial advisors of their day. They simply were. And they were intimately involved in the financial affairs of the people in their community. And they served the faith. They helped provide means to the Holy Family. Well, one day, one of their clients had a bill from these two gentlemen. And that client looked at the bill and said, well, shoot, I don't want to pay them. And by the way, I don't actually have to. Right? And this is precisely what they did. But before they did this, and when I say to you that these two men were intimately involved in the affairs of their community, and they arranged the financial affairs of all the wealthiest people in their town, several of them loved these two men and came to them and say, hey, this fellow, we see what he's trying to do. All you have to do is renounce your faith and you're good. We don't have to worry about it. So they went to the two brothers and said, hey, just renounce your faith and blah, blah, blah. They said, no. The exact response is far more beautiful. It says, if you know what I know, you would never ask. They forsook all of their prestige, all of their power, all of their money to keep the most valuable thing in the world, and that is their relationship to their maker. This is just the way it is, and we should remember this. Keep going. Okay, so there is a limit to wealth, okay? And if someone could please do me a favor, just take a guess. Does anyone know what this is a picture of? I won't ask because this is, it's very hard. This is a picture from what was called the Black Wall Street. And one of the things that sometimes people say is, because at the end of the day, this is a conversation about how we foster capacity and capital in the African-American community. And I've been arguing to you that Baha'u'llah said, hey, you know what? We have to have a dynamic coherence. We should have money, but it's inferior, right, to the development of virtues and capabilities. This is a picture of Black Wall Street, okay? And this was a place where African Americans were very prosperous. And they thought of it as a refuge against the rest of the nation's difficulties. The problem, right, is that unfortunately, and this was in Oklahoma, the racism was so deep that even though they built a place and they were all upstanding, excellent, professional people, all of what they built in this world was decimated in 1921, right? During a massive race riot. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves as African Americans, right, as people of whatever race or background, what do we do? Because here's a group of people that played out by all the rules, but the racism was so intense that they completely destroyed the community that they built. Well, let's look at some specific prescriptions. We had Baha'u'llah give us the lofty examples and the ideals. Abdu'l-Baha goes into more detail, and Shoghi Effendi even more detail in the House of Justice today. We're going to look at each of those. Abdu'l-Baha came to the United States and he says, you know, this racism thing is a really big problem. And you're going to have to grab this bull by the horns and work assiduously. And if I could get someone to read this slide, please.
Capacity and capital formation begin with faith and end in the systematic application of virtue to problems. Preparations for the first Race Amity May 21, 1921 conference began when Abdu'l-Baha tasked Agnes S. Parsons, a white woman prominent in Washington high society, to arrange in Washington a convention for unity between the white and colored people by working with Louis Gregory, a prominent black attorney. Correction of the present wrong requires no army, for the field of action is the hearts of our citizens. When we have put our own house in order, then we may be trusted to carry the message of universal peace to all mankind.
Okay, so friends, the first step in building capacity and capital for African Americans in this country is helping all of us remember that the spiritual things are more important than material things. And attacking head on the paramount, the persistent sense that you can do anything to make a buck. Baha'u'llah taught us that. The second thing is to begin to systematically bring whites and blacks together. And what I want to contend to you is that from the days of Baha'u'llah to now, Baha'is have been leading efforts with all sorts of people, high and low, throughout this country to build capacity and capital in a fundamental way, in a way that will endure, in a way that will ultimately eradicate racism at the root, okay? And so we had these race unity conferences at a time when whites and blacks weren't getting together. And at these conferences, the two items that you see highlighted in the blue, they came directly from one of the first conferences on the agenda. That's what they wrote. How beautiful. How capacity building. Because you see, friends, what we have to realize is that you can't begin to have a capacity in the African American community if when an African American attempts to build a business and they start to thrive, the hatred in the society around them is such that people come and actually want to burn down their business. We have to specifically transform the hearts first. And I want to go back a slide. Ismail, how am I doing for time? I'm preaching now.
Are you still good?
We're still good. Okay. I want to go back one slide. And I said to you that the movie Avatar was amazing. And it was amazing on multiple levels. But one of the reasons that it's amazing is because it's an example of one of the great ideas that the philosopher I talked to you, Socrates, brought to his people in Greece. In fact, we have it to this day. And I think, it's a very compelling explanation of teaching the cause of God. And it's called the allegory of the cave. And in the movie Avatar, we have an example of that. And I have one more coin. And so this coin is an allegory, and it will go to a person that can tell me why I say the movie Avatar is a great example of the allegory of the cave. We'll take answers. This is a harder one, because you have to kind of actually remember the movie. And that's hard. I'll give you this hint. So the protagonist, and I told you at the very beginning of this talk, what's the purpose of the talk, Russell? To help us get our inner hero on, our inner, in the words of the House of Justice, inner protagonist. The hero in the movie Avatar is a Marine, not particularly bright, and he can't walk. And what he does is that he gets into the avatar, the body of a being, right, from the country or the place of Pandora. This is a hard thing to remember. Are there any answers at all in the chat? I may just have to say this one because the movie came out a long time ago and may not know it well.
There isn't an answer in the chat, but maybe it will be great to give a hint as to what the allegory of the cave might have been, so that they can connect it to the movie if they saw the movie.
Oh, Farinas, thank you. What a wonderful MC you are. Why don't you, so you're also bright. Do you know the allegory of the cave?
I just remember something about standing there and thinking that the whole world is the cave and that there's nothing outside of it. Or looking at a wall and something with light. I'm sorry, I have a terrible memory.
You know, friends, this is something that we should just explore in a little more detail. So Farinas is, and I hope I'm saying your name correctly, has led us in the right path, and the picture shows it beautifully. So you have a group of people that are chained, right? And they're sitting there looking at a wall, and the wall has shadows on it. And the people are in their chains, fixated upon the shadows. When one of them, by chance, by the grace of God, is able to shake the chains, step up out of the cave, and see reality as it actually is. They come up and they realize that all that they had thought was reality was in actuality just a bunch of shadows, right? And so they get up out of the cave, they see reality for what it actually is, and they say, oh my goodness, I knew nothing before. Now I see everything. And in the movie The Avatar, what happens is that Jake believes that it's all about getting the unobtainium. So he actually starts out as he uses his avatar body to infiltrate the Na'vi, right? The blue people. And he falls in love. He falls in love with the people, he falls in love with their culture, and he sees that the world he thought was real was the shadow, right? And the real world was the simple life that he could have in that culture. It's a movie that I encourage you to go back and see again. It's not just that they have magnificent, creatures and scenery and all the rest of it. It is a retelling in a modern way of an ancient story that's very, very pregnant with meanings about how the world actually works. And friends, one of the things that we are called upon to do as Baha'is is to wake people up, to help them to see that the things that they are so attached to, their money and their crap and their power, are at the end of the day just shadows, right? Okay. We're covering a lot of ground. We're thinking deeply. Okay, so one of the things you may say to me, okay, Russell, we've done all of this. How does this affect, what do we really want to look at what we're doing? And what I'll say to you is that all throughout the Baha'i community in North America, I'm sorry, this thing doesn't want to land. Baha'is are doing some amazing work. And they're doing this amazing work, leveraging something that we call the Institute process. And the Institute process, if you had to describe it in a sentence, is nothing more than systematically building capacity. That's it. Capacity to do good and to serve others and to love. And this is a picture of a group of people that are involved in the process in my community. And what you see them doing, African American and other youth, working with the police to create goodies, candies, and then to take these candies out as part of the junior youth spiritual empowerment process and offer them in their neighborhood. Friends, this ability to sit in what we call study circles, right, and help each other to master a dynamic coherence between the material things of this world and the spiritual is a power. And this power has the potential to remake our own local neighborhood communities. In fact, the interesting thing about this picture is that throughout this country, throughout the United States, all over the United States, we have an epidemic of police brutality, where police inflict grievous, sometimes deadly, bodily harm on Blacks. And so the idea that you would have them collaborate together to make goodies to give out is like shocking. When it shouldn't be. That's how it should be. This is what Baha'is are doing. And again, when we think of, wealth, Russell, how does this tie to wealth? Well, if you have a community where everyone is free, right, to pursue what God put in them, they can systematically acquire the virtues that get them the cash flows they need to be prosperous. One of the great examples of this, specific to the African American community, and it's not in the Baha'i community, but it's in the Quaker community, is the story of this particular gentleman. And it's such a beautiful story, and I'll expatiate on it in more detail. But what I'd like is if someone could read the question and then share the response on this slide, and we'll talk about it and go back to the implications for what we're doing today and how each of us can pursue our own becoming heroes.
What can you do in your community leveraging divine guidance and our accumulated experience? An Underground Railroad agent in New England, Quaker philanthropist William Roch Jr. of Nantucket aided slaves arriving by ship in New Bedford, Massachusetts in 1770. He and his father, William Roch Sr., helped to end enslavement of Marines aboard local ships. William Roch Jr. and his sons owned 3 merchant ships, the Beaver, the Bedford, and the Dartmouth. The latter was the historic vessel involved in the Boston Tea Party, died at 91.
Okay. This gentleman was one of the most important and wealthiest human beings in the United States, period. He was so wealthy. And again, this is something I learned when I was in school as a little American child. And it was the concept of the Boston Tea Party. Well, the Boston Tea Party occurred on a ship. The ship that it occurred on was owned by this man. Big deal, okay? Really big deal. Well, this man was a fervent abolitionist as an article of his faith. In fact, the town where he lived, New Bedford, was where Frederick Douglass, who was the preeminent abolitionist at the time of the life of Baha'u'llah, Frederick Douglass escaped slavery and sought refuge and succor. He had to recuperate from the rigors of being a slave in New Bedford. And what made New Bedford a beacon of hope for African Americans all over this country were its Quaker citizens who were very wealthy. And one of the things that you have to, so fair disclosure, I am a financial advisor and I do work with people on their money. One of the things people ask me is, okay, how do you get rich? It's really the simplest thing in the world. The first is to get in touch with whatever the gems of potential God put in you. Baha'u'llah explains it beautifully. He says, regard man as a mine, rich in gems of inestimable value. Education can alone enable mankind to benefit therefrom. So every one of us is given the potential. And this potential, Baha'u'llah calls gems of inestimable value. So that's the first step. Understand what it is God put within you. The second step is also embedded in the quote just recited. Learn how to use those virtues in service to humanity. Right? And so when you do those two things, you then become the beneficiary of a stream of cash flows. You get a job, okay? And with those cash flows, with the income coming in, you then systematically acquire assets. It's that simple. But the essence of the process begins with having faith and then using virtue. Suppose that you have within you the capacity to be a brilliant scientist or a magnificent engineer working for some extraordinary company. Well, you can't touch that until you've learned the virtues of deferred gratification, perseverance, because the process of becoming an engineer is hard, or any other profession. Faith gives us the tools. Virtues give us the practical application of spiritual power to unfurl what God put in every one of us. And so what Baha'is are doing all over the country, all over the world, are shining the light of the Word of God on individual and community lives in such a way as to give people the ability to, in a vigorous way, pursue their own development. In fact, we call it the twofold moral purpose. Make yourself better, and then use that better self to serve humanity. That's it. Okay. Now, you can make it more complicated. I don't know why you would ever want to do that. But you may say, okay, well, geez, okay, so I got to get the cash flows, I got to get the education. If I'm spiritual, if I recognize, have faith in God, right, and use that faith to develop my virtues, and I start doing this stuff. But what if I don't have means? What if I'm poor, right? The cool thing that's happening is that there are so many benevolent resources, very much like these wealthy Quakers, that are now turning towards the members of the African American community and saying, hey, we want to help. Our job as Baha'is is to help be the bridge and the connector between those benevolent resources, both within our own community and the broader world, and African Americans throughout this country. And all of that begins with love. Friends, we have come to the end of my presentation, and I want to thank you for your patience in enduring me picking on you and asking you to read these quotes and talking for such a long time. Love to all of you. And if I think I'm on the hook to answer a couple questions. Is that right?
That is correct. Russell, I just wanted to thank you on behalf of everyone for your engaging, thought-provoking, informative, educational, uplifting presentation. I just also wanted to invite all the participants to be protagonists and ask questions that really push Russell, because he's put himself out there. So I think that there is someone who said, thank you, Russell. I was indeed engaged, even though I came late. And since he said this to everyone, I will share that his name is Kino. Kino is a teacher.
Yay. Thank you. That's a kind thing to say. God bless you.
So go right ahead. You can put your name in the chat, or you can raise your hand by going to participants on the bottom of your screen. There should be a bar with commands, and then you click on raise hand. I see a hand raised. Mitchell has his hand raised.
Oh, Russell, this was really a very well prepared, chock full of thought-provoking concepts, and I thank you very much for this presentation. I want to go back to a concept early on where you started about the cruelty of the economic system leading to these challenges. It was new for me. Let me go back and see if I understand it right, and if not, help me. The concept of using slaves as collateral for the plantation owners. Okay, so if I think that through, that forgetting about racism and white supremacy and everything else, I will fight for the death to hold on to that, because otherwise I'm in financial ruin. If you want to abolish slavery, what I'm saying, I'm not justifying it or anything. I'm saying the system they were locked into tied their ruin to this. And I had not put, and maybe I'm putting too much into this, but two and two together and saying the cruelty of the system was much more complex than I think I understood before you mentioned it. Thank you.
So thank God that that some of this was useful to you and your kind remarks. And I'm giving you a big hug, a virtual hug, because what you said about slavery and specifically its cruelty being more thoroughly intertwined with wealth, not only in America, but throughout the world, it is deeper than what I had originally appreciated prior to doing the research. And to really illustrate that, let's just think through this. So it really was the case that slaves were common collateral, okay? And when we think about collateral, you make a mortgage, and that mortgage note gets securitized. Fancy word for they get bundled up and sold as bonds, investment products. And so what happened in the United States of America is that all these slaves were collateral in mortgages, and then the mortgages themselves were sold as investments all over the world. Two important and profound, terrifying consequences. The first is that everybody was in on the party. Cruelty was endemic, and in the sense that so many people benefited from, right? You could have a person that actually hated the concept of slavery living in Frankfurt and would say to their family, hey, we're not involved, but they'd buy the bonds, either inadvertently or actually consciously. That's how widespread it was. So that's point number one. Number two, because it was so widespread, the productivity that had to be extracted from slaves caused the increment of terror applied to make them work to increase year by year by year. If you were to actually see the numbers, you'd be shocked. They had it down to a science. In fact, you know, many people think of, there was a gentleman whose name I can't think of, who they said, oh, he's the father of scientific management. They went into factories and they measured the amount of time people worked, and they saw that, hey, if you watched people, they worked more productively. No, he wasn't the father. There were other people who were in the business of extracting the most that they could from slaves to pay those bonds. And they were able to do it through a terrifying cruelty. And I don't want to belabor this point, but I just want to thank you for seeing that, because it was an intimate part of the process. And the reason that I think of this is not only to honor my ancestors and elders and appreciate the extent to, you know, this was a part of our reality, but to celebrate the efficacy of Baha'u'llah. I think, unfortunately, we may not really appreciate, and this is the case, we're God's creation. It's hard to appreciate the manifestation of God. But one of the things that we need to just kind of pause and show gratitude around is Baha'u'llah was very effective. I mean, imagine, right? Bringing about the energy to end an institution from which the majority of people in the world benefited from. So thoroughly intertwined with all aspects of life. And through his revelation, which engendered merciful susceptibilities, human consciousness was changed enough to put principle over profits. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mitchell, for that timely question. I just wanted to probe that a little bit more. Could you speak a little bit, Russell, to how that's still happening today, both with respect to the African American community, but also in areas such as education and healthcare, and just how we make funding decisions and, you know, funding allocation decisions with regards to what we do with our taxes, and any other area you might want to address.
I'll take another scene from the movie Avatar, and I encourage all of you to go back and look at the movie. It's a fantastic, very entertaining, but it's also, you know, meaty. And I'll show you a scene from Avatar that I think gets at the whole cruelty thing.
Safety on. Gunny, make sure you spread these broke ticks around from squad to squad. Wainfleet? Yeah. I want our best cannon, cockers riding herd on the boots. Yes, sir. 3 mags, 80 rounds. Make them last, make them count. Left bag clear. Take down. Put the weapon inside. Clear. Take down. No, 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 no! I wouldn't do that, sir. The blasting compound goes back to the mine. What's your name? Logan. You're fired! This thing is completely out of control. Listen to me. I am not authorizing you to turn mine workers local into a freaking militia.
Hey, Bomber, I want this Hydra on a port forward mount on Valkyrie 1. I declare threat condition red. That puts all on-world assets under my command.
What? Oh, you think you can pull this palace coup shit on me? I can have your ass with one phone call.
You're a long way from Earth. Unasked this man.
Okay. Frightening, traumatic. And I don't mean to be frightening and traumatic, but I want you to understand that the gentleman that we see, you know, clinging onto his life in the end of that scene, precipitated it all by exalting the pursuit of gain over all things. And so what we see happen, and this is what happened with slavery as well, and we still see it, people running around with guns. Where do you think that comes from? The almost irrational attachment to the right to bear arms, right? It's tethered to a history of having at the ready the means to go get property, right? And so I don't want to overexalt this, because this is really a message about what we're doing to make the world better. I'm just, in response to your request, helping us to appreciate cruelty is unfortunately intertwined in all aspects of currently how we pursue capital and capacity formation, capital pooling and capital and capacity formation. We need to be the antidote to that. And that's what Baha'u'llah, through his teachings and his words and the Institute process, this is what we're trying to fix.
Thank you so much, Russell. I think that was so poignant. And I am very sorry to you and to everyone for having to discontinue the question and answer portion of our program. We have had such a bounty today. And we have still some questions in the chat and people who would like to reach out to you, Russell, if you are willing to provide your contact information. Perhaps we can have a, oh wow, there are so many good questions. I feel terrible about ending it.
Let's do this. So if you reach out to me, at the end of the day, we are people of action. A good friend of mine is having a fireside this coming Friday, where we're going to be exploring capital and how we use capitalism in companies to help African Americans. We're having a fireside on that. And so we can rejoin the conversation then. Ismail, I don't know if he's still here because I can't see all the faces, but perhaps Farnaz, I'm on the hook to provide someone their coin. So give me the contact information to mail it to. And then if you could share with me the names of those people that want to continue the conversation, I'll make sure that they get an invitation to the fireside, where we will be talking about how we pursue profits in corporations in a conscientious way. We will be continuing the conversation.
So apparently, thank you for that. And apparently people who would like to stay on can do so if you're available, Russell, to answer additional questions.
Unfortunately, I'm on the hook for another engagement, so I've got 3 minutes myself.
Okay, let's see if there was one last question from Jacob, who has his hand raised.
I'll concede. I don't want to take the time. Thank you.
No, sorry.
Again, we will have a fireside on Friday, and many folks can come and we can rejoin the conversation then, if that helps.
Wonderful. So we'll have the information sent out to the group that was invited to this Okay. Well, thank you everyone for participating in today's program. I wanted to thank again our speaker and to also let you know that we have another speaker coming next week, Dr. Sohrab Kourosh. And to please be sure to, when you receive the email invitation, to please go ahead and share it with friends and family and post it on all social media so that more people will have an opportunity to benefit and really share knowledge and perhaps generate knowledge as we did here today. So without further ado, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Sunday and that you tune in next week. Russell, I hope you have a great rest of your day and that you come back and perhaps share more with us in the future. Oh, we will have sorry, what did you say?
What an honor. Thank you for having me. Very grateful.
Thank you. And we will now close with a prayer.
They have no other intentions save the diffusion of the fragrances of God. No other hope except the promotion of the heavenly teachings. Like the candles, they are burning with the light of the love of God. Like the candles, they are burning with the light of the love of God. And like thankful birds are singing in the rose garden of the knowledge of God. And like thankful birds are singing in the rose garden of the knowledge of God. They have no other intention save the diffusion of the fragrances of God. No other hope except the promotion of the heavenly teachings. Like the candles, they are burning with the light of the love of God. Like the candles, they are burning with the light of the love of God. And like thankful birds are singing in the rose garden of the knowledge of God. And like thankful birds are singing in the rose garden of the knowledge of God. They have no other intentions save the diffusion of the fragrances of God. No other hope except the promotion of the heavenly teachings. Like the candles, they are burning with the light of the love of God. Like the candles, they are burning with the light of the love of God. And like thankful birds are singing in the rose garden of the knowledge of God. And like thankful birds are singing in the rose garden of the knowledge of God. They have no other intentions save the diffusion of the fragrances of God. No other hope except the promotion of the heavenly teachings. Like the candles, they are burning with the light of the love of God. Like the candles, they are burning with the light of the love of God. And like thankful birds are singing in the rose garden of the knowledge of God. And like thankful birds are singing in the rose garden of the knowledge of God. In the rose garden of the knowledge of God. Yeah, in the rose garden of the knowledge of God. In the rose garden of the knowledge of God. In the rose garden of the knowledge of God.